What I'm about to tell you is the story of one of Japan's most chilling and mysterious unsolved crimes. On New Year's Eve in the year 2000, as families across Tokyo were preparing to celebrate the new millennium, a horrific scene was unfolding in a quiet, residential neighborhood in Setagaya ward. The Miyazawa family, a father, mother, and their 2 young children, were brutally murdered in their own home by an intruder who not only killed them, but stayed in their house for hours afterward, eating their food, using their computer, and leaving behind a treasure trove of evidence that should have solved the case. Yet 25 years later, despite one of the most intensive investigations in Japanese history, the killer remains free. This is the story of the Setagaya family murders, a case that has haunted Japan for over 2 decades and continues to baffle investigators to this day. To understand the full horror of what happened that night, we need to first meet the Miyazawa family, 4 innocent people whose lives were cut tragically short. Mikio Miyazawa was 44 years old, a successful businessman who worked for a consulting firm. He was described by friends and colleagues as hardworking, devoted to his family, and someone who lived a quiet, unremarkable life. Mikio had no known enemies, no financial troubles, and no involvement in anything that would make him a target for violence. His wife, Yasuko, was 41 years old and worked part-time at a local store. She was known in the neighborhood as a kind, gentle woman who was deeply involved in her children's lives. Yasuko was active in the local community and was well liked by everyone who knew her. Their son, Nina, was just 6 years old, a bright, energetic boy who was looking forward to starting elementary school. He loved playing video games and was excited about the new millennium that was just hours away when his life ended. Their daughter, Rei, was only 8 years old. She was described as a sweet, intelligent girl who did well in school and had many friends in the neighborhood. Like many children her age, she was fascinated by technology and enjoyed using the family computer. The Miyazawas lived in a 2-story house in Setagaya ward, one of Tokyo's most affluent districts. Their neighborhood, called Kamisoshigaya, was considered extremely safe, the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and children played freely in the streets. The family had lived there for several years and were well integrated into the community. What makes this case even more tragic is that the murders occurred on what should have been a night of celebration. December 30th, 2000, families across Japan were preparing for New Year's festivities, and the Miyazawas were no different. They had spent the day together as a family, and there was no indication that anything was wrong. The horror began to unfold on the morning of December 31st, 2000, when Yasuko's mother arrived at the house for a planned New Year's visit. Haruko Irie, Yasuko's 62-year-old mother, had come to spend the holiday with her daughter's family, as was their tradition. When she arrived, she found the front door unlocked, which immediately struck her as odd. The Miyazawas were typically very security conscious, and leaving the door unlocked was completely out of character. When Haruko called out, there was no response. She entered the house and began searching for her family. What she discovered would haunt her for the rest of her life. She found Mikio's body first, lying in a pool of blood on the first floor near the stairs. He had suffered multiple stab wounds and blunt force trauma to his head. The scene was so shocking that Haruko initially couldn't process what she was seeing. In a state of panic and disbelief, she continued searching the house. Upstairs, she found the bodies of Yasuko and the 2 children in the loft area that served as Nina's bedroom. All 3 had been brutally murdered, stabbed multiple times with what appeared to be a knife. Haruko immediately called the police, and within minutes, the quiet residential street was swarming with emergency vehicles. The Setagaya ward police, along with investigators from the Tokyo Metropolitan Police, quickly secured the scene and began what would become one of the most extensive criminal investigations in Japanese history. What investigators found at the Miyazawa house was unlike anything they had encountered before. This wasn't just a brutal multiple murder, it was a crime scene that told the story of a killer who had spent hours in the house after committing the murders, behaving in ways that were both calculated and bizarre. The evidence suggested that the intruder had entered the house through a bathroom window on the first floor sometime after the family had gone to bed on December 30th. The window showed signs of forced entry, and there were footprints in the garden below that matched shoes found at the scene. Based on the blood spatter patterns and the positions of the bodies, investigators were able to reconstruct the sequence of events. It appeared that Mikio had been awakened by sounds from upstairs and had gone to investigate. He encountered the intruder on the staircase where a violent struggle ensued. Mikio fought bravely to protect his family. Evidence showed that he had managed to injure the attacker, as the killer's blood was found mixed with Mikio's throughout the house. However, Mikio was ultimately overpowered and killed. The killer then went upstairs to the loft area where Yasuko and the children were sleeping. All 3 were murdered in their beds. The brutality of the attacks was shocking, even to experienced investigators. Each victim had suffered multiple stab wounds, and it was clear that the killer had continued attacking even after they were already dead. But here's where the case takes an even more disturbing turn. After committing these horrific murders, the killer didn't flee the scene. Instead, he stayed in the house for what investigators estimate was between 6 to 10 hours, engaging in behavior that was both methodical and deeply unsettling. The intruder went to the kitchen and helped himself to food from the Miyazawa family's refrigerator. He ate ice cream, leftover barley tea, and even made himself a meal. He used the family's toilet multiple times and took a shower, washing off the blood from his injuries and the crime. Perhaps most chillingly, the killer spent time on the family's computer. This was in 2000, when home internet access was still relatively uncommon in Japan, but the Miyazawas had a computer connected to the internet in their living room. The killer used his computer to browse various websites, including sites about Korean entertainment and information about the Miyazawa family themselves. Investigators found that the computer had been used for several hours after the estimated time of the murders, suggesting that the killer was completely comfortable remaining in the house where he had just killed 4 people. If the behavior of the killer was puzzling, the evidence he left behind was even more so. In most murder cases, investigators struggled to find enough physical evidence to identify a suspect. In the Setagaya case, the problem was the opposite. There was almost too much evidence and none of it seemed to lead anywhere. Let's start with the most obvious clues. The killer left behind an extraordinary amount of his own blood throughout the house. During his struggle with Mikio, the intruder had suffered significant injuries and he continued to bleed as he moved through the house over the following hours. DNA analysis of this blood revealed that the killer was a male of mixed ancestry, likely part East Asian and part European. This was unusual in Japan, where the population is predominantly ethnically homogeneous, and it suggested that the killer might have been a foreigner or someone of mixed heritage. The killer also left behind items of clothing that provided additional clues. A baseball cap with the logo of a Korean Air Force unit was found at the scene, along with a sweater that had been manufactured in Japan but was a style more commonly sold in other Asian countries. Perhaps most intriguingly, investigators found a bag of sand at the scene that appeared to have been brought by the killer. Analysis of this sand revealed that it came from a very specific location, Edwards Air Force Base in California. This sand was mixed with particles that were consistent with materials used in military aircraft testing. The killer had also left behind footprints throughout the house, made by a pair of sneakers that were identified as Nike Air Max shoes. These particular shoes had been sold only in South Korea, never in Japan. In addition to physical evidence, investigators found that the killer had made several phone calls from the house using the Miyazawa family's phone. However, these calls were to numbers that couldn't be traced, and it's unclear whether they were successful connections or simply wrong numbers. The computer usage provided another layer of mystery. The killer had accessed websites related to Korean pop culture, looked up information about theatrical shows, and even visited sites that contained information about the Miyazawa family's neighborhood and local events. All of this evidence painted a picture of someone who was familiar with technology, had connections to multiple countries, and was comfortable spending extended periods at a crime scene. Yet despite this wealth of evidence, investigators were unable to identify a suspect. The investigation became even more complex when DNA analysis revealed something unexpected. The killer's DNA showed markers that were consistent with someone of Mongol or Central Asian heritage, in addition to the East Asian and European markers. This suggested that the killer might have had ancestors from multiple regions, making ethnic profiling even more difficult. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police assembled a task force of over 280 investigators who worked around the clock to solve the case. Given the international elements of the evidence, the Korean manufactured shoes, the American sand, the mixed ethnic profile, investigators expanded their search beyond Japan's borders. They reached out to law enforcement agencies in South Korea, the United States, and other countries, seeking assistance in tracking down leads. The investigation into the Edwards Air Force Base sand led to some interesting discoveries. Edwards is a testing facility for experimental aircraft, and the specific type of sand found at the scene is not commonly available to civilians. This suggested that the killer might have had some connection to military or aerospace activities, either directly or through family members. Investigators traveled to South Korea to trace the Nike shoes and other items that had been manufactured there. They worked with Korean authorities to identify possible suspects who might have traveled between Korea and Japan around the time of the murders. The DNA evidence was run through databases in multiple countries, but no matches were found. This was particularly frustrating given the quality and quantity of the genetic material available. One of the most puzzling aspects of the investigation was the apparent randomness of the crime. The Miyazawa family had no known connections to organized crime, no significant debts or financial troubles, and no enemies. Mikio's work was mundane and didn't involve anything that would make him a target. The family lived quietly and kept to themselves. This led investigators to consider whether the murders might have been random, perhaps committed by someone who was mentally ill or under the influence of drugs. However, the methodical behavior after the murders, the careful use of the computer, the systematic cleaning of wounds, the calm consumption of food, suggested someone who was in control of their actions. Another theory that gained traction was that the killer might have been a stalker who had become obsessed with the family, particularly with one of the children. The fact that he had researched the neighborhood online and seemed familiar with the house layout supported this theory. However, no evidence of stalking behavior was ever found. The investigation also looked into the possibility that this was a case of mistaken identity, that the killer had intended to target a different family but had entered the wrong house. The Miyazawa house was located at the end of a cul-de-sac and was somewhat isolated from neighboring homes, which might have made it an easy target for someone unfamiliar with the area. As the investigation progressed, tips and leads poured in from around the world. The case had attracted international attention, and people from various countries contacted Japanese police with potential information. Each lead was carefully investigated, but none led to the identification of a suspect. The psychological profile developed by investigators painted a picture of someone who was likely in their 20s or 30s, physically fit, and familiar with Japanese culture but possibly from a mixed cultural background. The killer was thought to be someone who was comfortable with technology and had access to international travel. Over the years, numerous theories have emerged about who might have committed the Setagaya murders and why. While none have been definitively proven, they provide insight into the complexity of this case. One of the most persistent theories relates to the sand from Edwards Air Force Base and the Korean military cap found at the scene. Some investigators believe the killer might have been connected to military personnel stationed in Asia, possibly someone with access to multiple military installations. This theory suggests that the killer could have been a military contractor, a service member with multinational experience, or even a family member of someone in the military. The mixed ethnic background revealed by DNA analysis could be consistent with someone from a military family that had been stationed in various countries. Given the killer's apparent familiarity with the family's routine and his comfort level in their home, some investigators believe this was the work of a stalker who had been observing the family for an extended period. This theory is supported by the killer's knowledge of the house layout, his use of the family's computer to research local information, and the seemingly personal nature of the attacks. However, no evidence of prior stalking behavior was ever discovered, despite extensive investigation into the family's daily routines and social connections. Although the Miyazawa family had no known connections to organized crime, some investigators have explored whether the murders might have been related to Yakuza activities. Japan's organized crime syndicates have been known to use extreme violence to send messages, and the brutal nature of the killings could be consistent with such an attack. This theory has major weaknesses. Yakuza killings typically have clear motives and are designed to send specific messages to specific audiences. The Setagaya murders don't fit this pattern, and no evidence has ever been found connecting the family to organized crime. One theory that has gained credibility over the years is that the killer intended to target a different family but mistakenly entered the Miyazawa house. This could explain the apparent randomness of the crime and the killer's surprise at encountering resistance from Mikio. Under this scenario, the real intended victims might have been neighbors or people with similar names who live nearby. The killer's extended stay in the house could have been an attempt to figure out his mistake and decide what to do next. While police have never publicly named specific suspects, various individuals have been investigated over the years. These have included foreign nationals living in Japan who match the physical and ethnic profile, military personnel with connections to the locations where evidence originated, individuals with mental health issues who had histories of violence, people who had been in contact with the family through Mikio's work or the children's school activities. None of these investigations has resulted in charges being filed, and the case remains officially unsolved. The Setagaya family murders had a profound impact on Japanese society that extends far beyond the immediate tragedy of 4 lives lost. The case challenged many assumptions about safety and security in Japan and led to significant changes in how the country approaches criminal investigation and public safety. The investigation revealed weaknesses in Japan's criminal justice system, particularly in handling cases with international elements. Prior to 2000, Japanese police had limited experience with DNA analysis and international criminal cooperation. The Setagaya case forced them to rapidly develop these capabilities. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police established new protocols for preserving and analyzing DNA evidence, and they began working more closely with international law enforcement agencies. The case also led to increased investment in forensic technology and training for investigators. Japan has traditionally been considered one of the safest countries in the world, with extremely low rates of violent crime. The Setagaya murders shattered this sense of security for many Japanese citizens, particularly those living in urban areas. The case highlighted the vulnerability of ordinary families in their own homes and led to increased sales of home security systems, door locks, and other protective measures. Many neighborhoods that had never considered safety to be a concern began organizing citizen patrol groups and security initiatives. The case has remained in the Japanese public consciousness for over 2 decades, with regular media coverage on anniversaries and whenever new developments occur. The mysterious nature of the crime and the wealth of evidence that has led nowhere has made it a source of endless speculation and amateur investigation. Numerous books, documentaries, and television programs have been produced about the case, each offering different theories about what might have happened. This media attention has kept pressure on law enforcement to continue investigating, but it has also led to the spread of misinformation and conspiracy theories. The Setagaya case has benefited from advances in forensic technology over the past 25 years. DNA analysis techniques that weren't available in 2000 have been applied to the evidence, providing more detailed information about the killer's ethnic background and physical characteristics. However, these advances have also highlighted the limitations of forensic science. Despite having what should be more than enough evidence to identify the killer, investigators still haven't been able to make a positive identification. The case has served as a model for international cooperation in criminal investigations. The collaboration between Japanese, Korean, and American law enforcement agencies in pursuing leads has established protocols that have been used in other cases. This cooperation has also revealed the challenges of investigating crimes that cross international borders, particularly when dealing with different legal systems and jurisdictional limitations. As of 2024, the Setagaya family murders remain unsolved, but the investigation continues. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police maintain an active task force dedicated to the case, and they regularly review the evidence using new forensic techniques as they become available. In recent years, investigators have focused on genetic genealogy techniques that have proven successful in solving cold cases in other countries. These methods involve comparing DNA evidence to genetic databases to identify potential relatives of suspects, even when the suspects themselves aren't in the databases. The mixed ethnic background of the killer has made this approach more challenging, as genetic databases are not equally representative of all ethnic groups. However, investigators remain hopeful that expanding databases and improving analysis techniques will eventually provide new leads. The case remains one of Japan's most wanted criminal investigations, with a substantial reward offered for information leading to the killer's identification and arrest. Police continue to receive tips and leads from around the world, though most have not led to significant developments. On significant anniversaries of the crime, police and media outlets issue public appeals for information, hoping that someone with knowledge of the case will come forward. These appeals often generate renewed interest and additional tips, though none have yet solved the case. Advances in DNA analysis, facial reconstruction technology, and data analysis continue to offer hope for solving the case. Investigators are particularly interested in techniques that can provide more detailed physical descriptions of suspects based on genetic evidence. The large amount of digital evidence, including the killer's computer usage and phone calls, continues to be analysed using modern techniques that weren't available in 2000. While much of this evidence has been examined multiple times, new analytical methods occasionally reveal previously overlooked details. While the Miyazawa family's lives were tragically cut short, their memory continues to motivate the ongoing investigation. The case has become a symbol of the need for justice and the importance of never giving up on unsolved crimes, no matter how much time has passed. The investigation has also served as a training case for new generations of investigators, helping to develop skills and techniques that have been applied to other cases. The Setagaya family murders represent one of the most perplexing unsolved crimes in modern history. Despite an enormous amount of physical evidence, international cooperation, and decades of investigation, the killer remains unidentified and free. What makes this case so haunting isn't just the brutality of the crimes or the innocence of the victims, it's the maddening fact that the killer left behind everything investigators needed to solve the case, yet somehow remains a ghost. The DNA evidence, the distinctive clothing, the unusual sand, the extended time spent in the house, all of these should have led to an identification within months of the crime. Instead, they've created a puzzle that has stumped investigators for over 2 decades. Perhaps most disturbing is the realization that the killer is likely still alive, possibly living a normal life somewhere in the world, while the Miyazawa family lies buried and their case grows colder with each passing year. Yet the investigation continues, driven by the hope that advances in technology, changes in global politics, or simply the passage of time will eventually provide the key to solving this mystery. Every year that passes brings new techniques, new databases, and new possibilities for justice. The Setagaya family murders remind us that some crimes transcend their immediate victims, becoming symbols of larger questions about justice, safety, and the limits of human knowledge. Until this case is solved, it will continue to haunt not just the investigators who work on it, but all of us who believe that the truth, no matter how elusive, deserves to be found. The Miyazawa family, Mikio, Yasuko, Nina, and Rei, deserve justice, and somewhere in the world someone knows what happened in that house on December 30th, 2000. The question isn't whether this case will be solved, but when.